Hi guys, Bill again. I want to talk about one of the feminist movement's saints, Emmeline Pankhurst. See, there's this myth that she won the vote for Britain's women and she scored a mighty victory for women everywhere by doing that. But it's not really true, as any student of history will tell you. For a start, Pankhurst spent her time pursuing a thing called the £10 suffrage. She wanted voting equality with the wealthy ruling class in Great Britain, not the men that surrounded her that didn't have the vote. And the popular narrative reads a bit like alphabet soup. You know, there's a host of political parties and groups, and they're splintering all over the place. It's like a Life of Brian. Pay attention though, and you'll start to see the genesis of the British Labour movement in there. And if you really want to know who got British women their vote, well, start from Keir Hardie and work your way forward. The Pankhursts did play a part, but it was a small part, and it was entirely motivated by selfish self-interest. Pankhurst used to like to say that deeds, not words, were her motto, so take her at her word. Look at what she actually did, not what modern feminist revisionists claim that she did. Pretty much that doing amounted to swanning around the world, talking to fellow suffragettes, all at her supporters' expense. She never worked a day in her life. She even got a servant in to look after her kids, so that she didn't need to become a household machine. Her activism looks a lot like the modern feminist version. You've got a pampered elite complaining about how oppressed they are, and they embrace some truly reprehensible radical actions. Do you recognise this girl? Her name's Emily Wilding Davidson. Now, she was killed during a stunt at Epsom Racecourse. I don't feel too sorry for her. She didn't have any intention of becoming a martyr or getting injured. She had plans to attend a suffragette dance that evening. But clearly she didn't give a toss about the safety of the riders or the horses that she was targeting, and the distinct possibility that either or both could be injured or killed by her reckless action. That didn't bother her at all. The horse she attacked, Anmer, survived the encounter, but his rider was a guy called Herbert Diamond Jones. Now, he suffered a concussion, damage to his arm, and he had a lifetime of survivor guilt to deal with. Now, it's only blind luck that prevented more serious harm being done to both of them. So at least Davidson had the courage to place herself in harm's way. Arson and bombings were much more the suffragette style of doing business, and we got a name for that today. We call it terrorism. There's a lot still made today of the appalling conditions that the suffragettes were subjected to when they were finally imprisoned for their activities, and the hypocritical victim mentality couldn't be more blatantly obvious. Nobody, either then or now, seems to give a toss about the fact that these conditions existed in the prisons before and after our special snowflakes had their wee holiday at His Majesty's leisure. The fact that wealthy, privileged women had to suffer them for a few weeks is supposed to make us feel some kind of shock or shame. How about not? And the pathetic little hunger strikes are even more transparent. I read a lot about how the hunger strikes were used as a government tool to keep brave suffragettes weak. You know, they're being oppressed by prison officers, the same prison officers who supplied them with hot meals every day and ended up force-feeding the hysterical nutters when it looked like their own stupidity was going to kill them. These horrible, oppressive men didn't get their education, they were a lot less wealthy, and they were just as lacking in any kind of voting power as our little princesses. That patriarchy was really serving them well. 12-hour shifts in a prison. What a life. Emily changed her tune real quick when the war started, but reality once again is a little bit removed from the modern revision of events. When she made speeches and she mobilised her activists to help the war effort, it was by shaming men into enlisting. You ever hear of the White Feather Brigade? If you've ever had any experience of the military, you'll know that the teeth, the fighting arms are only one component in a large and complex machine. That spotty teenage kid shitting himself as the flares go up and the whistles blow is only one part of an attack. You need artillery, air attacks, you need armour, and you need a logistical train to support them, every single one of which is just as vital as Tommy and his bayonet. When Pankhurst was bullying tradesmen and artisans into uniform, she was sabotaging British war efforts. You read any history of Britain's efforts in the Great War, and the poor quality of British ammunition is a constant theme. Our shells didn't explode because the men who should have been making them were too busy being blasted to bits by German weapons that went bang when they were supposed to. It's why we've got protected trades now whenever there's any chance of war looming. And don't make the mistake of thinking that the women taking up positions in Britain's mills and factories and yards were anything to do with Pankhurst either. That would be a gross distortion of the events. These were working women. The same working women that Pankhurst had quite happily thrown under the bus if she'd ever won that £10 suffrage. The growing labour movement in Britain did a huge amount to integrate women into industry and agriculture. Pankhurst's occasional speech supporting their efforts are not the same thing as a dedicated effort to find useful positions for initially unskilled and always physically weaker workers to fill. Now, after the war, and largely in recognition of the tremendous sacrifice that they'd made on behalf of the nation, men were awarded pretty much universal suffrage. Women got the vote as well, but initially they were restricted in their voting rights by wealth and by age. The age restriction was a practical matter. If it wasn't for that age restriction, women would have become the voting majority overnight, thanks to the huge number of males who were killed in the war. And right or wrong, that's a radical change to the political landscape which the legislators just weren't prepared to countenance. The wealth restriction though, the wealth restriction was plainly a sop to the suffragettes. The labour movement continued to fight and win advances for working women, and eventually they achieved equality for everybody. But Pankhurst's movement gave up, they dissolved almost as soon as they got what they wanted. I think it's important to appreciate the impact of the labour movement on all aspects of British politics, and the gradual evolution of that movement from a socialist agenda to the moderate centre-left viewpoint that they hold today. Today that movement echoes in the party named after it, and it's very close, unhealthily close, affiliation to Britain's trade unions, but that's a subject for another day. Maybe when I have a rant at champagne socialism, I'll come back to this. However, in this context, what I want you to take is the impact of Pankhurst's selfish minority politics has been exaggerated and credited with one of a completely different movement's greatest successes. The appeal of Pankhurst to modern feminists is obvious, it's transparent. She did pay lip service to minority issues, just like modern feminists, but she weighed in heavily on behalf of a small, already privileged group of women. Their struggles got just enough hint of danger and hardship to be a little bit glamorous, and it allows for the use of extremist tactics to achieve the desired end result. You could paint it as a roadmap to successful political activism, but to do that, first you've got to revise the historical narrative. And that's something that's been successfully done here in the UK. It's not just the social media, it's not just the newspapers or popular books. I'll quote you from the official parliamentary website. Before 1918, only men were allowed to vote in parliamentary elections. Now that's technically correct, but it's ignoring and trivialising the fact that working men, almost half of the male population, were just as disenfranchised as their sisters. We've got to challenge these lies, people. If we ignore the past, we're going to keep on making the same old mistakes. I've put a lot of good stuff down the low bar. Have a wee swatch at it if you got a minute. You know, it might come in handy next time some harpy starts giving you hard times about how the men's had everything right up until St Emily spanked them into submission. You never know. Laters.